if you hire somebody or you bring somebody on board that is a senior technician, he's been around the block 20 years, he's got all this experience. When he does an inspection, it's natural for him to want to fix everything as he's doing the inspection. Yep. He wants to adjust a head. He wants to raise a head. He wants to, oh, there's a leak. I need to investigate that leak. And an inspection that should take 30 minutes ends up taking 3 hours. And you're just burning time, unbillable time in that process.
Welcome to the Roots of Success, the premier landscapers podcast that brings you the latest tips and strategies for successful landscape business. I'm Jim Calley, one of the principals and coaches of McFarland Stanford. Jason New and I started McFarland Stanford to coach landscape businesses after years in the industry ourselves. Now, more than 10 years since we began, McFarland has a deep bench of coaches and subject matter experts who work with our clients on very specific issues of business. Whether you're struggling with people, profits, or just day-to-day challenges, our coaches and guests have the real-world experience and practical advice to help you build a thriving and profitable landscape business.
Hello and good afternoon. This is Chris Psencik with McFarland Stanford. Excited for you to be joining us this morning for another Roots of Success podcast. Very excited to have Mark here with me today, Mark Pyrah out of Oregon. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that.
Excited to have you with us. Mark, you and I got to meet each other a couple months ago up in San Antonio. We were at a conference there for Weathermatic, and you and I were both speaking there, and I had a chance to sit in on your presentation, and I was absolutely blown away with some of the stuff that you covered there with what you're doing at your organization and Irrigation. And so I'm super excited to bring you to our listening base and you to share some of your knowledge and experience of how you've been able to change your organization. And so with that, I'd love to talk a little bit, just let's get to know you a little bit. A lot of people haven't met you and haven't had an opportunity to visit with you and meet with you. So I'd love to introduce you to our audience. And I know you're the president-elect of the Oregon Landscape Contractors Association. You also run a huge organization out of Oregon. And so, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm an Idaho native, grew up in Idaho, but I've been in Oregon now for almost 25 years. So this is where all my kids have been raised. I have 5 children. I've been married in May for 25 years. So this is home for us. We visit Idaho, but Oregon is our home. But yeah, I'm president-elect of OLCA and president of Peak Landscape. Peak Landscape is just over 20 years now that we've been going. So excited to be here, excited to chat and hopefully share a few insights.
That's super exciting. All right, so just a little bit about Peak Landscape. How much revenue do we do in 25? What are we forecasted for 26?
15.5 million is what we did last year. We're looking at just over 17 this year. That's
okay.
Our goal.
And for the context of our listeners, give us the breakdown of your organization. How much is construction, maintenance, irrigation? Sure. How does that break down?
Yeah, maintenance is roughly about 35% of our total revenue. No construction, I would say traditional construction. We do it, I wouldn't say zero, but it's between 2%, 3% of what we do. We do tree work. That's another 10% to 12%. Water management is another 10 to 12%. And then enhancements on top of that. Plant health care as well. There's a little bit of snow sprinkled in there, but we don't count on it because this year we barely had any.
I'll say, I don't even know if you guys got snow up in your
area. We got a threat, and that's good because that's all we really need sometimes. But
that's awesome. Yeah. Mark, I know today we're going to focus a lot on the irrigation side because that's what you talked about at that conference. And I really gravitated to what you were saying and some of the metrics and details you went into. But when you made the shift from irrigation as a service to irrigation as water management, you really turned the tide in your organization from a profitability standpoint. And so I'd love if you just tell us a little bit, like when you first started Peak Landscape, how did the business start? How did you get into it? Where did it all begin for you?
Sure. I was working at another company, a smaller company, and one of the gentlemen there that is my business partner now had approached me, and our mantra is that we feel like not necessarily that we can do it better, but that we have an opportunity to provide a service and provide something that maybe the market isn't providing in a way that we can. And so that's it. We spent about 6 months looking at that and building out a business plan, and then carried forward from there. And our initial plan was to do construction, which we did for a short time, but that was really to gain the relationships. Our goal has always been is to build lasting relationships, but based on technical experience, quality workmanship, and just great customer service. And so in order to build those relationships, construction was one of the fastest ways to do that. And then we pivoted and went to maintenance, and then from there built out these other revenue streams that go along with it.
I love that. And so you were finding ways to connect with your customer in a variety of capacities, ultimately connecting and creating those relationships as you were doing that. Now, obviously, irrigation, I come from Texas. I'm in Texas. Irrigation is a huge piece to what we do down here, as well as it is in Oregon. And so obviously you didn't start your business with irrigation in mind. So when you first started, you were servicing irrigation systems, you were servicing irrigation controllers. Tell us a little bit. I know you're on the SmartLink system, and you're going to talk about that a little bit more as we go through today, but what did irrigation management look like before you moved into the technology side?
Yeah, I think irrigation for us, even in the beginning, Oregon, it's a little bit different, but it's almost, it can be looked at as a necessary evil a lot of times. And that's how we looked at it, is a necessary item. You have to do it. Here in the summertime, it hardly ever rains in the summer. So irrigation here, it's a misnomer, is we get a lot of rain, yes, but in the summertime, it hardly rains. And so the grass goes brown. If you don't water it, it goes dormant. So irrigation's a big deal here. And it was more of a necessary item than it was a profit center or something that we looked at as something that we could benefit from, right? And so that's how we treated it, is we have just enough people to get what's done. Our hair's on fire all summer long because we're putting out fires. And then you just turn the systems off and sigh relief at that point.
Yeah. All right. So at some point, something changed and you said, we've got to get proactive of how we solve this. What was that thing that made you, that light bulb moment where you said, I can't keep doing it the way I'm doing it. I've got to shift my mindset, my team's mindset, to do something different, to change and make this better. What was that moment for you?
I think the moment was, it was after we were introduced to Weathermatic. They had been talking to us off and on for at least a year. And then we finally decided to go that route and utilize their technology. But it wasn't until I had a conversation with Perry Webb from Weathermatic, and he opened my eyes to how irrigation is not necessarily just about, it's not just about fixing irrigation systems or anything of that nature, but it's more of a business. It should affect the whole business. So water affects everything. It affects how much fertilizer you use. It affects how much you prune your shrubs or not prune. It affects more than just a system. It affects your whole business. And once I understood that, then I rebuilt the entire system. Just tore it down to the studs and rebuilt the irrigation department into something that it should be. And that's when we flipped the name from irrigation to water management. Because really on any given day, I think the statistic that kind of locked it in for me was that on any given day, we're managing in the summertime somewhere between 3 and 4 million gallons of water every day. And so for us to be good stewards of the Earth's resources, that's one piece, but to also approach it from that perspective and understand that it affects more than just our irrigation department, that was a game changer for me. And that's where my mindset really shifted.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a lot of business owners that are listening to us today. We've got a lot of probably irrigation techs and managers that are listening to us. And I've fought with this with not only ACE members in our peer groups, but also internally with the organization I ran. Everybody was on board with you day one. They all loved this. They were ready to jump into technology and change everything they were doing to go after what you said. That's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's not how it works.
If only that was the case. All right. So you obviously had pushback. What and how did you approach that pushback within your organization?
I think we had levels of it, right? We had, and I wouldn't say pushback can be positive too, right? So for me, feedback is a gift. I love feedback from all angles. And I think where it came down to was training and understanding, right? When you're rebuilding something from the ground up, I think that was the hardest transition, is we really needed to understand. And it took us a good 6 months before we really understood that this was more of a benefit to us as a business than it was potentially to even our customers.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was a matter, once we realized that, then it was off to the races as far as implementation. But that initial 6 months, it was convincing our management team to buy into the technology on their side. And the irrigation techs, you had levels of technicians. The ones that were maybe not as experienced and more technologically sound, they embraced it right away. But the older senior technicians who are steeped in technical knowledge, they tend to think they can do it better their way, and they want to fix everything. And that was the inspection process, and getting that straight and having them change how we flow through an inspection. Once that was all trained and they saw the benefit of it and they saw the speed of it and they saw how it was improving their lives, then there was a shift. And it didn't take long. It was within a year, all of our technicians were on board. They were all trained, and they were complaining about why certain sites didn't have weathermatic controllers that you could remotely control.
Yeah. It's funny. I found the same thing to be true in my organization when we were teaching and training this and implementing this, is that what started as a leadership decision and a tech decision for our organization really became about the management side of it, of like, how does it make our life better? And how does it actually improve what we're trying to do and what we're trying to deliver? And so you talked about the training and the understanding was what you really had to focus on with your team. How did you initially in that first 6 months start to roll out the training aspect? How did you start to educate your managers on the why behind why technology and the remote access and the capabilities are going to improve your organization?
Yeah. The first thing I did is I wanted them to be a part of that change. And so it wasn't just, I wanted to make sure it just wasn't something I was implementing from the top. Here's the directive. It was more of a, let's build this together. So as part of that process of reworking the entire flow of that division, I brought in our water managers, I brought in our technicians, and included them in the process of rebuilding the SOPs, rebuilding the workflow, so that they could have input and buy-in from day one, instead of me just saying, this is what we're doing, and then forcing them to implement it. Because if they don't have buy-in, as you probably know, they're not going to be champions at implementing whatever technology or systems that you want to implement.
Yeah. And I think we can echo that in every aspect of the business. All right. So let's touch a little bit on the SOPs. You mentioned, and you had the opportunity to share a little bit about your SOPs and what you did. But before automation, how did you first identify SOPs that were going to be critical mass to making this successful? And then how did you come about like the system of putting these together and formulating these thoughts and putting them into action in your organization? Walk me through what that has looked like for you from a standard operating procedure side of things.
Yeah, thank you. I think SOPs, where they come into play, a lot of people start with SOPs and go from there, and they start building them out. But for us and for me, what really was important, it was understanding workflow first, and starting from inspection all the way through. And this could be the case with any business division or business service, whatever it is. You have to start, where does that lead come from? Where does that start? And then follow it and get a workflow through the entire process, all the way through to the invoice. And even after that point, what it looks like for the next 6 months after you finish a project. So once you get that workflow, that's critical, because then from the workflow, you determine what SOPs need to be built and delivered. And then from those SOPs, then you decide what tools need to be a part of that SOP to make that tool the most efficient, or that SOP the most efficient and effective. If you start with just SOPs, and it's like an assembly line that has some pieces working, but there's not really an understanding of how it should flow through a factory or through an entire business. But that was critical. So we started there and then built SOPs to go along with the flow, and then implemented tools to go with the SOPs, and then automation, and now moving forward, AI to help make those even more effective, more automated.
Yes, because I can tell you in our peer group meetings, the term SOP comes up more times than I can count. And I always kind of laugh because I'm like, what are you doing with all these SOPs? We can
Right.
create all these things, but like, where's the repository of what and how we implement these? So talk to me a little bit. How do you guys, like you mentioned, finding the workflow, creating the SOP, creating the automation that comes with it, and now using AI to help you do that? Where does that sit within your organization? So if I'm an irrigation tech and I come in, you're training me on how to do this. How are we rolling this out with our teams? How are we training them?
It's changed, obviously, over time. Just within the last 3 years, it's changed pretty dramatically. We are a G Suite company. We use Google Workspace. So a lot of our stuff is stored in Google Drive, and that's where people have been able to access it previously. I can share documents, I can share workflows, but now we're using, for instance, even just this year, we're using Gemini, we're using Notebook LM, which is another one where we can house all of our SOPs in one place. And that way I don't know if you know this, but like all the large language models, ChatGPT, Claude, doesn't matter what it is, they hallucinate about 10 to 12% of the time. They make stuff up. And I catch them doing that all the time. But the Notebook LM allows you to just put sources in, and the AI is only able to answer questions based on those sources, right? So it's like a peak library of SOPs, and then they can ask questions, they can have audio files, they can do flashcards, all these different things to access that information. Notebook LM can then be put on your phones, it can be put everywhere, so anybody can have access to that information. So that's where it's really stepped up, and we've even developed, they're not apps, but they're little gems with Gemini. And so our technicians and our water managers can access information without having to make a phone call to me or to the water manager or whatever it might be. Just instant access to information that's training them and helping them be better.
Yeah. And what really stands out to me about what you just described right there is that you're not just creating systems and process that just become clutter that sits in a server, but it's actual actionable items that people are now using, and they have the tools to be able to access it and reference it and do those things to put it into action. So you can take more steps with the data that you're actually creating and putting together.
And I could give you a use case real quick, if that's right.
Yeah, I would love that.
So just yesterday or just this week, we had a situation. I've created and given our water managers we call it a water management tech assist, but it's an AI assistant that helps them troubleshoot and answer questions. And we had a Hunter iCore 2-wire controller that wasn't operating properly. So he talked to the AI, and this AI is trained to answer questions based on support from Hunter, support from Rainbird, support from Weathermatic. It's got all access to all that information. He described the situation. The assist told him a couple of options, what it might be. He explored those options. We figured out it might be a decoder issue or a module issue. So he ordered this specific module for this specific controller, came in, he put it in, still wasn't working. He talked to the AI again, and through the process of all this, we figured out, yep, the controller's bad. We need to replace the controller. So all that happened without him having to talk to me or talk to another senior technician. And it happened in a matter of a day instead of weeks, or he was able just to, and he talked to it in Spanish. So he was conversing with it in Spanish without having to have any additional input from any other people. And it trained him at the same time. So it's training him as it's answering his questions. So that was just one thing. And we've had now all of our technicians have access to that. And so they can ask questions about any broken head, how to install something, how to fix drip line, anything like that.
That is incredible institutional knowledge that you have at your disposal. And I can tell you, we have a recruiting team and we recruit irrigation techs. And I can tell you, it's really hard. And finding guys that know the business and know these things is getting fewer and fewer every single year. And so I'm constantly trying to train our teams and our companies we work with of how do we find resources like this that help you expand and get your people more educated faster, because you're not going to be picking these guys off the shelf anymore like you used to with 30, 25 years worth of experience. You have to have resources like this. And so hearing how you guys are already putting that into action is just an incredible tool. So thinking through the standard operating procedures, I'd love if you just call out what is, if I had a world-class irrigation company and I've got the top 5 or top 3 standard operating procedures, what is it that we need to be thinking about as a business owner or as an irrigation division that you would think are critical mass? Like, these are the ones that I would say, yes, absolutely, these are what you have to have.
Yeah. I think you have to have an inspection SOP for sure. That's your baseline for your technicians, about something that a foundational piece they can come back to. Because as you mentioned, technicians are hard to find. So if you do have a new technician, you want to make sure all of your technicians are operating on the same wavelength, that they all are trained to do an inspection the right way. The reason that's super critical, because if you hire somebody or you bring somebody on board that is a senior technician, he's been around the block 20 years, he's got all this experience. When he does an inspection, it's natural for him to want to fix everything as he's doing the inspection. Yep. He wants to adjust a head. He wants to raise a head. He wants to, there's a leak. I need to investigate that leak. And an inspection that should take 30 minutes ends up taking 3 hours, and you're just burning time, unbillable time in that process. So having that SOP that guides them through and tells them and trains them, start here, do this, then do that, then do this, how to get to the technology, how to take a picture even. These are all little things that are important for those technicians. So an SOP about irrigation inspection, that would be number one for me. The second one would be how that, almost just like it's an SOP for us, but it's the workflow, how it gets from point A to point B along that process. And so that's the other critical one. From there, we have actually 3 different SOPs for 3 different service lines. So we have our inspection line, we have a service call line where people call in for broken stuff, we got to go fix it. There's a different SOP for that. And then there's a different SOP for our maintenance supervisors who are also doing small repairs on their own, just fixing a broken head. So what happens when they fix a broken head? How does that get in our system? How does it move through the system without causing kinks or issues or delays?
Yeah. And I believe, and I don't know if we mentioned at the beginning, you run Aspire at your organization, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I thought. All right. So I'd love if we shift gears a little bit to the measurement side. So on the KPI side, key performance indicators, you called out some really incredible key performance indicators that you use with your team that you find a lot of success with. And I'd love if you'd share a little bit, what are those tools that you use to measure success with your team?
Sure. There's only about, and one of the items that I think is critical here is what you're measuring. There's that old adage that what gets measured is what gets done, right? So you have to be super careful about what you do measure and what it means to different people. Our technicians don't really care necessarily about revenue. That's not something they're focused on. Our water managers are focused on that. And so at each position, we're giving different KPIs. So for our technicians, a KPI, they have one simple KPI, and that's just a couple. One is labor efficiency, is just, are they on track for their estimated hours versus actual hours? So that's one KPI for them. For our water managers, it would be how much irrigation revenue is being invoiced per technician. And that gives them the ability to understand what the baseline is for each technician, but also how a technician is performing. Are they moving through a system like they should? And then from a business perspective, we look at, from the customer side, KPI is how many customers have pre-approval amounts for us, how many inspections are being completed, what is our average irrigation repair, what is our gross revenue per hour. So those are all things that are more on the customer and financial side. But at that base level, labor efficiency is critical. And then moving up from there, irrigation protect and so on. But pre-approval amounts is one of the things that's way underlooked in our industry, because it allows us to move our approval time from a week or 2 weeks down to as fast as even same day.
Yeah. And I could not agree with you more. I know when we were together at the SmartCon conference, Lex was using the example of 20%, like world class is 20%. I'd love to know, not every organization is at 20%, but when you look at your pre-approval rate, what percentage would you say it is generally at that you try and target for that pre-approval rate?
We want north of 80% of our customers to be on some kind of pre-approval amount. That could be as little as $500 to as much as $2,000. But we want every customer on a pre-approval amount of some kind. But 80%, north of 80% is our goal. We're north of that right now.
Yeah.
We only have maybe 15 or 20% of our customers that require us to send a proposal. But even then, we can send it same day, and typically within 2 or 3 days, we have an approval back from them. So it's not weeks between approvals and inspection.
Yeah. And coming from Texas, I can tell you the number one reason we get fired off of a project is not because the quality, it's because somebody's irrigation zone went down and things die very quickly when it's 100 degrees outside. And like pre-approvals are absolutely priority one to me from irrigation management. And hearing that it's the same for you in Oregon, I hope everybody's understanding just how important that is when we talk about pre-approvals and being able to move quickly, make decisions quickly without having to wait on your customers. It's just goes well beyond that, just the customer service when we talk about education.
The fun analogy I like to use is I want our teams to be like my 81-year-old dad. And I say that and they're like, what are you talking about, Mark? What I mean by that is my dad's 81. He moves pretty good, but he has to keep moving, right?
Yep.
So if he's slow, that's fine. But as long as he's moving, he's great. If he has to stop, then it takes a while for him to get moving again. So in our SOPs, our workflows, it's really best if that you don't have any kinks anywhere in that process. If there's a kink, everything slows down, people get frustrated, the process just breaks and stuff's falling off the assembly line, and it's hard to get moving again.
Yeah. All right. When we were together, you talked about connectivity with regards to irrigation and your remote access controllers. And you had given the percentage of 90%, that you shoot for 90% on your connectivity with the goal of getting to 100%. Why is that so important? We just wrapped up our conversation today with Mark Pyrah, and it was such great information, such great details that we went ahead and we broke this up into 2 parts. And so we just wrapped up part 1. I just wanted to quickly recap some of our key points from that conversation. And let's just go into it. So reframing irrigation as water management. How do we turn this into something that we can transform it into a super profitable engine for your organization? The biggest shift wasn't just technology, it was a mindset. Mark moved irrigation from reactive, how does he break and fix service, to proactive water management strategies that actually can impact the entire business. At the end of the day, he talked about how he's managing millions of gallons of water that's moving through his properties, and how we reframe our thought process on the responsibility we have and how we can approach this from a business aspect and a stewardship aspect to make sure this is a profitable endeavor for you. You know, bottom line, when you elevate irrigation as a strategic function, it becomes an absolute revenue driver for your organization, not just a cost center. Number 2, he talked about systems win. Workflow equals SOPs equals tools equals automation. You know, instead of starting with just standard operating procedures, Mark emphasized how we build systems in the right order. Key insights I want to focus on. Standard operating procedures without workflow create clutter. It creates inefficiencies. How do we garner employee buy-in? How do we turn users that have been doing this for years and years and years and get them bought into how we can elevate our teams, our companies, and our experiences by using these things. Operational excellence is about more than just standard operating procedures. It's about connecting systems to people that actually use the systems. And then finally, number 3, speed and simplicity that can drive performance utilizing key performance indicators and pre-approvals. Our highest performing teams, Mark talked about, focus on simple role-specific metrics and eliminate bottlenecks. So how do we eliminate the kinks, the mistakes, the hiccups that are ultimately slowing our organizations down, slowing our technicians down, and adding clutter that is reducing our cost opportunities and thereby increase our opportunity to be profitable. And so very excited. We had that great part 1 discussion with Mark, and excited for you to join us when we have part 2, where we're going to dive even deeper into the metrics and even deeper into what you can be doing as an organization to get your teams to the next level, what metrics you need to be looking at, how we need to be managing this, and what you can be doing today to move this into an opportunity seat for your organization to grow, develop, get better, get faster, and get more profitable in 2026. And as we move forward into 27, 28, 29, and beyond. So excited for you to join us for part 2.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Roots of Success, brought to you by the subject matter experts at McFarland Stanford. Have a question you want our coaches to tackle in a future episode? You could submit that at mcfarlandstanford.com/podcast. And to find more helpful content from McFarland Stanford, follow us on X, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. If this or any of our episodes have piqued your interest in ACE peer groups, we encourage you to join us at ACE Discovery. Just check out the events tab at mcfarlandstanford.com. This is Jason New, co-founder and principal at McFarland Stanford. We'll see you next time.